Well, guys, welcome to today's session. As Kendall said, I'm currently working as an education specialist, but I have been spending a lot of time, my entire career actually, as a teacher. And then I worked in the last couple of years, had the opportunity to work with teachers to develop their pedagogy and teaching practice. And I'm now working at Pro AV Solution as the education specialist. So it's very exciting. You didn't come here to see that. You came here to learn about this. But before we go to begin, if I can ask you guys to connect to my my lesson on using the Smart Learning Suite online platform, open up a browser, navigate to hellosmart.com, join as a guest, and it will ask you for my classroom number. And you'll see 25875 is my classroom number. Then just put your first name in and join. The reason why I'm doing that is not only will you see the slides that I'm presenting on your device, but there's also some interactivity in there where I'm going to ask you some questions, and then hopefully you can engage that way. So just give you a couple of seconds to go to, if you've got an opportunity, go to hellosmart.com, join as a guest, and the number that you want to use is 25875. It will ask you, it'll prompt you to come into my room. I can see a couple of people are starting to join already, which is fantastic. I'll continue to move on. If you do have any questions or you forget that number, please just write them in the questions pod in the GoToWebinar, and Kendall will be able to answer that for you. So the learning intention for today's session is that we're going to understand the SAMR model and its function a little bit more. We're clearly going to be able to identify the 4 different components of the SAMR model and explore how we can incorporate them into our teaching. We're going to look at how we can use the SAMR model to increase student engagement and interactivity in our lessons. And you're going to walk away with some tools linked directly to SMART that you can use, but I'm also going to talk of a couple of other tools as well that you can use that is going to help you to embed SAMR into your classroom. Now, the first part, I think it's understanding what is the SAMR model. Now, some people have, hopefully you've heard of this before, and some people might be familiar with it. But the SAMR model is, it's a fantastic model. It's an acronym for 4 stages. So substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. Developed by Dr. Ruben Puentedura. And I'm actually going to say, very fortunate, I was fortunate enough to meet Ruben. I was at a PD run by Apple. I'm an Apple Distinguished Educator, and I was at a PD where we got to actually mix and talk to Dr. Puentedura, and I was actually able to unpack his model with him a little bit. So the information that I'm going to give you today is not only, I guess, my interpretation of how it's successfully applied, but actually I've had lucky enough to have a lot of these ideas confirmed by him, which is quite exciting. It is identified as 4 different stages, and you can see that it's built from the bottom up: substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. So, and we're going to unpack each of these individually. And it's about, this whole model is about how the 4 different stages or degrees of classroom technology integration can impact on student learning. So that's what it's about. It's about using digital technology in our teaching to enhance the learning and then transform the learning, and moving through this model. Now, how does it work? It's about taking an existing lesson content, or it could be new lesson content that you are developing, but it's about taking an existing idea or an existing lesson or a new one and looking at ways in which technology can interact with the learning and the students' participation or their learning journey to really deepen the learning, deepen the students' understanding, and to really engage them. Now, it does work from the bottom up, and many suggest it's like a ladder. So the substitution and augmentation are your bottom 2 rungs, for want of a better term, where we're looking at the idea of enhancement. Then modification and redefinition are your top 2 rungs, where we're looking at transformation. Now, transformation is the use of technology in the learning has completely transformed the learning activity in the lesson. So the use and incorporating of that digital technology has allowed you to do things in the lesson or do things in the learning activity that were previously inconceivable. Whereas enhancement is the use of technology has enhanced the intended learning outcome. So it's actually had some sort of functional improvement, but we're going to unpack that. But a lot of people, like I said here, a lot of people can refer to the SAMR model as a ladder because of, starting at the bottom and working their way up. However, a common error is that this model is seen as a ladder, and a ladder that needs to be climbed. One thing that I think I need to be really clear about with the SAMR model, and yeah, it is still a ladder. You can work to substitution, and you go up to augmentation, and then modification and redefinition. You can climb it. However, a lot of people see a ladder as the point is that we need to get to the top. People see it as something that we need to make sure that we climb all the rungs, and every lesson that we do using technology needs to get to that redefinition stage. That's actually not the case. What we're looking at here is we're looking at a ladder that we climb only as high as we really need to go. So I think the danger of thinking of it like a ladder is that we have to keep climbing to get to the top. But it is about identifying the most appropriate approach, and therefore the most appropriate level or rung of the model that matches the learning intentions. So what I'm trying to get at is a lesson that's as a substitution isn't worse than a lesson that's at modification level. It really depends on what you as the teacher decide is the outcome. What do you want the students to achieve from that learning? And then that will determine how high you climb up that ladder. It might be better, instead of thinking of it as a ladder, as maybe a spectrum or a cycle. And one of the graphics that I love is this one. Now, I didn't create this. It's got there on the side. I can't remember who it's from, but it's an amazing. What I like about this is you've got the person here on the side who wants to get across the lake. Now, substitution is, okay, instead of swimming, I'm going to use a boat. Augmentation is I'm going to snorkel. So I'm still traveling across the water, but I'm actually looking underneath, and I can actually explore under the water. Modification is I've become a scuba diver, and I use a mask and a tank, and I can get deeper under the water and do further exploration. And redefinition is using a submarine, I can actually get down to the depths of the lake or depths of the sea and explore. In all of these four options, I'm still crossing the river. I'm just determining how deep I want the learning to go. And why I like this so much, this graphic, is you as a teacher will decide the learning outcomes that you want from the lesson, and you will decide what you want your students to achieve. And then it's about choosing the appropriate level that helps you to achieve that. So we want to get across the lake, but do you just want, at what level? Do you just want students to do a surface understanding? Do you want them to dip a little bit further under the surface? And this gives me that idea that while I'm still moving forward and I'm still achieving what I want to achieve, I can, I guess, differentiate the depth of the learning. So that's why I really like this. And if you think about it, all of these are examples of technology as well. So without a boat, there's no technology. The boat is the first piece of technology. The snorkel is the second, and so on. So it's a fantastic model. And I like this because it makes me think of it as a progression or a cycle as opposed to a ladder, because ladders, like I said before, we feel like we need to climb quickly. So that's the overall idea of the SAMR model. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the four levels individually. I'm going to unpack the idea of the level. We're then going to look at some different examples, and you'll see that as we go through the four stages, there's going to be some common themes, so you can get an idea of how these lessons have been developed and how they use the four levels in the teaching. And then I'm going to talk about some tools. So I'm going to link all of these elements together in this section to hopefully give you some ideas about how it can be used, and then we'll talk about how you can apply it into your own teaching. So substitution is our first level, or it's our first step. So it's about, in this graphic, it was about the boat, about stepping in the boat. So if we look at it as a definition, substitution is a person or thing acting or serving in place of another. So what it is just a fundamental replacement of a traditional learning medium with a digital one. So for example, if you had students writing in a book or writing on a piece of paper, moving that to typing in a Word document, that's substitution. So it can be seen as an entry level for using technology in teaching, and can be seen as a really nice entry point for teachers who are who might not feel as confident with technological skills as they do with traditional ones, or students who might be a little bit apprehensive with how they use technology. It's a great entry point. It's introducing that new concept, I guess, into the classroom. It also can be a great entry point if you haven't used digital technology in your classroom, regardless of how you feel about your skill. And it's a completely new approach that your students haven't used before. So using substitution can be a nice entry point. Now, having said that, a lot of people think that because it's the lowest rung on the ladder, or it's the first step of the in the SAMR model, people see it as substitution as somewhat a dirty word. And what I mean by that is they sit there and go, oh, you're only doing substitution with your digital technology. You need to push further and push harder. But remember, it's really important that substitution has its place. It really depends on what you want to achieve as an outcome for the learning. So it's not a dirty word. It's an entry point, but it's also, yes, it can be the stepping point that leads us off to the other 4 ideas, but it can be the perfect entry, or the perfect point for teachers who just want to do a substituted activity on digital technology. Who just want to do a written task on the computer that can be emailed to the teacher instead of a written one. And their learning doesn't need to go any deeper than that. So it's about making the right choices. And the only person who can do that is you. You have the expertise and you have the complete knowledge of your students and the learning outcomes that you want to achieve, that use that to drive which level you decide to push your learning towards. So here's some 3 examples that I'm going to talk about how substitution's used. So the first one I've alluded to already, so if I'm looking up, I've got a second screen and it's just up there, and that's I'm reading, so I can just link into what I'm talking about with you. But a drama teacher has their class writing a performance journal. Okay, can be something traditionally they had write a journal in their class workbook that would be handed to the teacher for assessment and review. Now, we've all used assessments like this before, and we've all had learning activities like this. A substitution idea would be move the element of the lesson into a Word document or a Pages. Now, Pages, if you're not sure, is the Mac version of Microsoft Word, so I put both. But if you get the students to write that performance journal in a lesson, in a Word document or Pages, and then submit that to the teacher either via email or through the learning management system at the school, there's an example of how the first step of substitution in learning has occurred. It's taken something from written and substituted with a digital option. Second one, so grade 3. Now I've pitched these at different levels, and you can insert whatever, I guess, theme or lesson or year level that you teach in here, but I'm just using some generic ideas. But second example is grade 3 research project on the gold rush. Traditionally, students created a poster. Yet again, move that into the digital world, that students create a poster using a software like Smart Notebook or Microsoft PowerPoint, Keynote, Microsoft Word, or another program where they can embed pictures and they can write text and use different fonts, and they can actually create a digital poster that they can then email or send it to you. Yet again, like the first one, all you've done is substituted a digital solution from a paper one. The third one, now this is from a teacher's point of view. I remember my maths teacher when I was at school, when we were doing complex algebra equations, what they would do is they would have their overhead projector with those clear plastic sheets with handwriting on it. Then they would put one down. We'd talk about the next step, then they'd put the next one down, and it would layer it on top of it. And what was happening is on the overhead projector, each of those plastic sheets were layering a new level of information that was being delivered to the classroom. An example of that is, instead of doing that, move it into a PowerPoint presentation, or using your Smart Notebook. Create a lesson where you just go page 1, then you click next, and it goes page 2, page 3. Okay, that is yet again a digital substitution for your analog use of the overhead projector and the overhead projector pages or slides, and changing it to a PowerPoint. Alternatively, you could use PowerPoint or Apple Keynote to create a PowerPoint slide and then save it as a video. so that the students could watch that presentation as a video as opposed to you having to project next. That's another type of substitution, how you've taken an idea and tweaked it. Now, what are some substitution tools that you could use using Smart Notebook or Smart Learning Suite? Now, or if you've got a smartboard at the front of your classroom, the first one you can do is the graphic organizer templates. Now, these are in the Smart Learning Suite as well as embedded in the whiteboard application on the smartboards. These are fantastic. You know, if you usually had a whiteboard, and in my teaching, I used to love using flow maps. So when I taught sound engineering, I draw, you know, a box and write microphone and then do an arrow and then do PA system and then an arrow and speaker. I used to love flow maps. So instead of, you know, having to draw that on a whiteboard, I can substitute that by going to the graphic organizer, scrolling through the many options and finding my flow map there and then projecting it up on the board. And there you go, I've used the digital substitution straight away. Another one you could do is using the game-based learning. If you are a primary school teacher and you've had sorting games, or you've had sorting activities, you can actually use my favorite one is the super sort. This one here is a screenshot of one that I've done with vegetables and fruit, and using the theme where they drag the pear over to the fruit, and if it's right, it shoots a cannonball at the other pirate. Now, there's lots of other different themes that you can use, but that's a digital substitution of something a student might have a pile of pictures of fruit and in front of them, and they might just move them to this side is fruit and that side is vegetables and so on. There's a digital substitution. The same thing with rank order. Have you ever got students to place things in an order and they have to learn and get feedback about that order? So rank order is another game that you can use. But probably, I guess, one of the most easiest and most effective, substitution tools you can use is the handout function in Smart Learning Suite Online, where you've got where you had students, you might have handed them out a printout of a Word document that you created. It was just a worksheet. You can upload it into Smart Learning Suite and they can complete it on their tablets. So those are just a couple. There's 4 examples of how you can use substitution in the Smart Learning Suite or Smart Notebook. And hopefully it's given you a couple of ideas about what you could do in your classroom. So I've just got, now for those of you who have logged in, who might have come in, if you can, hellosmart.com, my room number is 25875. But how could you use, I've just got to notice there's a couple of people in the room, how could you use substitution in your classroom? So what could you substitute? So could you substitute a worksheet? So on your screen, on your Hello Smart screen, you should see a little box where you can actually type in a response. Now, maybe you could, I'm just gonna see if anyone's gonna share, because when you share it, it'll pop up on the screen here. I'm using one of the new shouted out developments, which is fantastic. You've got the customized backgrounds and the question up the top. But hopefully you've got, now there's only 3 people who've logged into my room at the moment, so I'll give you a second maybe to write something and share it with us. If not, I'll move forward, that's fine. So online reading, absolutely, whoever posted that, that is one thing that you can definitely do. So if you've got students, like my wife is also a primary school, is also a teacher, she teaches primary school, and she had some students who were, to get them reading, she actually got them reading, they love soccer, so they're reading soccer articles. So she could actually have substituted that, and you could do the same thing, is substitute to find an online soccer article that the student could read. Yeah. Someone's written an online assessment, absolutely, you can substitute with online assessment. So direct, if you've got, for example, you got a multi-choice answer quiz that you get the students to do, you can move it digitally. Okay, vision boards, someone's gone vision boards, that's fantastic. Yeah, you can do a digital vision board, and that's fantastic, and that's a really great tool. So, you know, I know we used to do vision boards where you actually look through magazines and newspapers. Sometimes you can't find the images that you're looking for. Having a digital vision board can be really helpful, because then you just Google the answers. All right, let's move on. Fantastic suggestions, guys. And hopefully the point of what we're talking about today, hopefully I'm just planting some seeds in your mind about what you could possibly do in your classroom to use the SAMR model to increase student engagement and really create a nice, interactive, vibrant learning environment. So augmentation, so this is the second stage. So this would be our snorkeling in our in our infographic here. Augment, so to think about it as a definition, it's to make greater, more numerous, larger, or more intense. So it's about taking a lesson, an idea that you have substituted into the digital realm, and then looking for ways at how the technology can improve its functionality. It can be seen as having a greater impact on student learning because it's widening, I guess, the definition and the depth of learning that is happening from the learning activity. Technology provides a functional improvement to the learning task that allows you to expand in that depth, and the depth that's being achieved by the students or that's being displayed by the students. It can even open up the idea of collaboration, linking to other resources, feedback and reflection. So there's some key elements that come out of augmentation. Now, augmentation of an activity not only impacts the way in which students interact and engage with activity, but can also enhance and develop the ways in which the teacher interacts with the responses in the students. So we can look at how technology can help augment auto-correction functions, data analysis, and providing feedback to students. Remember, and you'll see this now at the bottom of a lot of my slides now, remember, augmentation can be a powerful tool, but it's really important from here on in, as I talk about the next 3 stages, you need to ask yourself, does this enhancement achieve what you want for the student's learning outcome? It's not about augmenting a learning task because for the sake of it. It's about whether or not augmenting it is going to achieve what you want to achieve, and whether it's going to send your students on the path that you want them to go down for their learning. So go back to my 3 examples. My drama teacher example, number 1, with the performance journal. So traditionally it was written in a book. We substituted that by getting the students to write it in a Word document and send it an email to the teacher. However, if we wanted to augment that, we move the writing of the journal from a Word document and we put it onto a blog. Now, why we put it onto a blog is because it now opens up to peer review and feedback. So you can actually expand the idea of the assessment and say, okay, you need to now do your performance journal on a blog. Then you need to read 2 or 3 other classmates' journal articles and then provide some feedback there about or ask them some critical questions about what they may have learned from attending that performance. So what you're doing now is that the use of technology has not only substituted the original task, but has augmented it, allowing peer review feedback. But it's also taken the learning and moved it past student to teacher and teacher to student interactions or conversation flow. It now makes it to a student to teacher, teacher to student, and student to student. So it's actually now got a wider breadth of feedback. And it really depends on how whereabouts you make that blog visible. If you can get blogs that are just within the school community or within your lesson, your class community, which is probably safer than putting it out on a general blog that everybody can read and comment on. But if you decided that you wanted to do that and put it out there for everybody to comment on, suddenly you can get the general public sharing their ideas as well. So it's about using, you can see how that activity is augmented and stretched out what's happening. Go to the grade 3 research project where they had created a poster and then they had moved from the traditional paper poster and moved it into a digital realm. Augmenting it means that instead of just getting students putting pictures and text on the page, you can actually start getting them to embed video. You can embed audio. You can put hyperlinks so that you can sit there and go, you're looking through here and it's got a little bit of information about, I don't know, Gold Rush, you're talking about Ballarat. And then you click on it and you're talking about, not just your fashion of what people wore during the Gold Rush. Then you click on a button that takes you to maybe an image or a page or a video that shows the different the types of dress that we used during that time, or whatever else element the student was trying to share. So this has been augmented by including interactivity, which then pulls in other resources outside of just the pictures and text that were pasted in the substituted version. So it's a really powerful way of seeing how you can just, by adding hyperlinks and linking to other resources, you've actually got a really augmented and much more powerful learning activity and task for students. And the third example is in a grade 5 geography lesson. So traditionally teachers use it as a summative task, like a quiz to assess Now, by substituting using digital tools like a Google form or a smart response task, the teacher has not only substituted the activity, like someone said before with online quizzes, substituted it with a short answer or a multiple choice true false kind of quiz that's digitally completed now. It's also been enhanced because let's just say if you were doing the geography one, students could spend time ensuring that they shared the correct the names of all the answers without having to worry about things like spelling and grammar. Now, I know we want spelling and grammar students to be proficient in that across all their learning. However, if the assessment is just about identifying capital cities around the world, students can get their points across and use the functionality of spelling and grammar check to help them present the right ideas and get their point across clearly without having to necessarily worry about spelling. So what can be some very challenging names of capital cities around the world. But additionally, the augmentation in that learning also, from a teacher's point of view, is you can set it so it auto-corrects. So that reduces the workload for you. So if you've got multiple choice, it's quite easy to get it to automatically correct the answer and tell the students whether or not they've got it right or wrong and generate a grade for you. But you can also export from there data that you can analyze. So I know Google and both even the smart responses you can download as a spreadsheet the responses, and then you can use them to get visual graphics of how the students performed in that class, and then you can use that to, I guess, tweak and improve how you would deliver that lesson again in the future. So just through substituting it on as an online assessment, we have been able, and put in Google Forms or smart responses, you now have been able to augment that tool by using additional functionality that really not only helps the students with their learning, but also helps the teacher with, I guess, the administrative task of it and the analysis side of it. Also, think about it with the spelling and grammar elements that students can use. It can also trigger metacognitive strategies. So if a student is spelled Kuala Lumpur wrong, for example, and they wrote it and then it came up with a red underline and they right-clicked and it gave them the correct spelling, it can actually trigger them to think around, oh, okay, I spelled koala, I made it Kuala Lumpur, I made it sound like the animal koala. Okay, and then I can actually trigger that in thinking about the way in which they approached it. So that's another way that it's augmented. Some different tools that you can use. So for example, I talked before about the graphic organizers at the Smartboard and also on Smart Learning Spread Online, but you could use the manipulatives. There's another option where they've got the manipulatives. So where you've got those, my favorite one is this one here, the fraction tiles, where you actually get students up the board, or they can actually manipulate what's going on, and they can like drag the 1-to-1 box up and then 2 halves, and they can see 2 halves makes a whole, and whole is equal to 1/2 and 2/4. And what you're doing is you're getting students interacting and using and the tool has been augmented, so it's not just a static tool, it actually has them interacting and engaging that's helping them to deepen their understanding of what's being taught. And the other one I mentioned was like the smart responses. You can use those tools to really create augmentation in your learning. So let's have a look now. So I notice there's the 3 people still logged in the room, which is fantastic. So think about, what could you use to augment in your classroom? So what tools might you use? How could you use augmentation? So I talked about an example of a drama teacher using a blog. You know, might be that something you might want to do. Do you want to look at how students could use hyperlinks and make their lessons interactive and reach out to a lot of other different resources? Could you get students using online quizzes that you could use for quick marking yourself? You know, that can be a really helpful tool. So, but what else could you do? What other things could you augment? Excuse me. I just give people a chance to respond. So if no one's responding, that's okay. We can move on. I'll just give you maybe another 5 seconds to see if someone has something to respond to. 4. No. Okay. Well, hopefully I've given you some ideas that you can use, and I will move forward because I know we have limited time. And we do have, I think, 25 minutes left. I've got 20 minutes left with you to cover these last two. So I guess the third level that I want to talk to you now is about modification. So yet again, our understanding of what modification means, modification is to make basic or fundamental changes to give a new orientation or serve to a new end. So that would be, I guess, a dictionary definition of modification. But now what we're doing is we're moving into the design, into the realm, of design change of the learning task. The first two were about taking an existing idea and using technology to enhance it. But now we're starting to transform that original idea and tweak it into something new that the technology has allowed me to explore. So we're changing the learning intentions and the learning outcomes, and they're generally getting a bit deeper because of those new avenues that the technology has allowed me to explore. And it can be taking an existing learning task and reimagining it, something that you may have substituted or augmented already, and then redefining and changing it. But remember, it's about using technology as its core. Most importantly, it's not about making sure that everything gets to the modification point. Only think about redesigning and modifying the learning if it's in the best interests of the students' learning and in the best interest of the learning journey that you want to send them on. You'll see I've got a new graphic here. It's funny, I've talked to some teachers and I've heard about teachers referring to as the coffee model. It's the coffee cup model, and it's the SAMR model. And what we're looking at here is, so coffee, a substitution for just water could be a cup of coffee. Augmentation is, adding frothy milk to it to make it a latte. Now, modification is, caramel macchiato. So that idea of taking, your latte idea and looking at some different sort of technology or different sort of input that you can put into the coffee that actually creates this entire new being that wasn't there before. And that's what we're looking at now. While this is a good model, my favorite is the boat and swimming across the lake, but I put this up here for a bit of variety. So my examples, I'm going to use the drama teacher again. So that's with the performance journal. Now, if we want to modify the lesson, now we can get the teacher transforming it into a collaboration space. So using something like smart workspaces, or Google or Office 365 documents, you can have multiple students working on the same performance journal. So creating a really big collaborative task. So particularly as we just, we're coming out of lockdown, thank goodness, and in Melbourne particularly, we had another snap lockdown. Teachers had to go into remote learning again. Teachers had the opportunity during first lockdown and this lockdown to redefine and modify learning tasks using online tools like Google Docs to get multiple students working on the same document. So you could have seen 3 students in this drama class went and saw the same performance. They could then use the collective document to all share their same ideas and work collaboratively on producing one performance journal for all 3 of them, as opposed to having 3 people hand in a performance journal on the same performance. Another alternative to modifying is they could create a video or audio blog where they can share their ideas. You could do like a news report where they might interview each other and talk about their ideas and then create this video blog that shares. They might even import some snippets of the performance that they saw and use that as a reference point for what they're talking about. So, and creating that sort of news report idea. Or an audio report, so you could do it like a radio segment. So suddenly the technology has pushed it into a completely new realm, and you're thinking about more creative ways the student can present and explore their ideas. A new example for number 2, so a visual communications class. So traditionally students will use graph paper and pad and pen to design maybe a low-income housing project to support refugees. Now, using technology, students can then do the same thing, substitute it into a CAD program and design it, but they could use 3-dimensional modeling with specialized software, and they could run digital simulations to see whether or not their designs would stand up against heavy winds or heavy rains or movement of ground or some sort of natural disaster. So what you're doing is so students are now not just presenting an idea, they're actually starting to use the technology to say, all right, it's not just an idea that's going to solve problems for low-income housing for refugees, but it needs to be sustainable and long-term solution that would stand up to a variety of different natural disasters or different natural challenges. So the technology has made you really modify what the original learning task is to expand its idea. Alternatively is they could create perfectly scaled models using 3D printers. So using 3D printing and technology could just take what was traditionally a flat design and idea and could actually bring it to life, particularly if they were looking at a different way of approaching the design of a building. So that's another way that they're getting students to think about it and modify the task to think about it in a deeper context. The geography lesson, we talked about the quiz. Now, another way that you can modify it is by redesigning the assessment to include gamification elements. So SMART, I've shown you a couple before, but SMART have game-based learning activities that you can use. But there's also things like Kahoots, or there's Socrative quizzes that you can, but Kahoots is a great example of games that you can use, highly interactive and engaging, but they're assessment tools. They're getting students the opportunity to read a question, see some answers, submit an answer, but they're also getting instant feedback. If you get it right, bang, you get a tick or you earn a point. If you get it wrong, suddenly you get across or you might have to re-answer it, and it's triggering metacognitive strategies while providing students with instantaneous feedback that's impacting their movement forward. So you can see how just redefining and modifying it from a traditional quiz to an interactive game that has those quiz features can really change what's happening in that learning. So, and like I've said here, and I talked about this, I guess, in augmentation, but additionally, it augments the teacher's interaction as well, or modifies the teacher's interaction as well. So suddenly you don't have to necessarily spend so much time marking, the quizzes or whatever. You can actually spend more time on data analysis because it'll extract how many people got right, and you can see which questions were students found easy, which questions students found challenging, and then you can use that data to really inform how you move forward in your teaching in the future. So some examples, the ones that I talked about in SMART is there are some 3 fantastic quiz-based games, 3 or 4. There's Game Show, which is a fantastic traditional game show where you've got 2 teams and there's multiple choice and they play for points and spin the wheel. Then there's Speed Race, a Speed Up, where you've got people racing around a track. I think that's what it looks like here, racing around a track and people standing at the board or playing on their devices. Then the other 2 are Team Quiz and Monster Quiz, where people work collaboratively as a team to answer quiz questions to try and either fulfill color in their icon or break their monster out. Fantastically interactive and fun games that students can use that can change and redefine that idea of what assessment is, and really modify how you approach that. The other alternative is, we talked about collaboration before, using workspaces so that you can upload into Smart Learning Suite any workshop that not workshop, what's the word I'm looking for, worksheet up into Smart Learning Suite and turn that into a collaborative document through using smart workspaces so that multiple students can work on the same document on their own devices and see everybody's input collaboratively. So really fantastic tools that you can use to explore modification. Now, I was going to ask you for ideas for modification, but I'm running out of time. I know that I have 7 minutes left before, not 7, I've got about, 10 minutes left, and I've got a couple more things to talk about, so I'm going to move through that if that's okay. Final is redefinition. So it's the actional process of defining something again completely differently or differently. It is seen as the most advanced level of the SAMR model. It not only addresses the key elements outlined in the original learning task, but it takes the enhancements of the other stages. So we got, the augmentation, modification, and substitution, and then enhances them and expands on them to really create a deep learning situation for students. Technology is vital for this to occur. So it's really important that technology is at the core, and this technology is driving the way that the lesson has been redefined. And I think it's really important that teachers, and when they're working in this stage, need to open themselves up to the concept of completely rethinking their concepts that they have been seen as tried and true or always worked. It can make you feel vulnerable. I used to redefine lessons in my classroom, and I used to feel quite vulnerable going in. And how I used to go about dealing with this with the students is I'd stand up the front of the class and go, guys, just letting you know, I'm doing something completely new today. We're going to do something completely, haven't done it before. I'm not too sure if it's going to work. Fingers crossed. I spent a lot of time planning. Let's hope that it does work. And if it does, maybe we can do it again in the future. And sharing that, I guess, the vulnerability at the start of the class really took the edge off for me, but it also made the students relax into it and be a little bit more open-minded with how they approached when I tried a redefined lesson. And it can also help to shift your thinking to the continual improvement model to ensure that we're not only just creating new and exciting learning experiences for our students, but we're creating a new world of learning approaches that can help us with our professional development and our continued improvement. So some examples, 3 examples. So grade 6 teacher has, you maybe investigating Australian animals. So previously the students, previous lessons had the teacher talking to students, showing them a video and reading articles. So this is how the content was taught. Now, using Redefinition, you can blur the walls of the classroom and bring experts from around the world in using video conferencing. So maybe you could connect your laptop to a projector or your smart board at the front of the room and have someone from Australia Zoo, who's actually in Queensland, zooming into your class in Melbourne. You could use zoologists from universities, who that you might not get access to, or someone from your local zoo. The Melbourne Zoo might have a park ranger that will be able to sit on a call with your students. And suddenly you've got the students asking them questions directly about the animals that they care for. So the learning is coming not from a passive text or a passive watching of a video. It's actually interactive. There's a conversation happening between the students and the zoologist. Additionally, you could get students taking a virtual tour of the Melbourne Museum. Like, I know that during lockdown, all these different areas were looking at ways that they could get people to their site without actually physically being there. And Melbourne Museum did an amazing Animals in the Changing World exhibit virtual tour. So maybe you could get students doing that as well. So suddenly you've redefined that idea of, instead of losing an entire day to take them to see these amazing exhibits that are interactive, you can get them to interact with them digitally. A Year 9 maths class, you're talking about parallel and perpendicular lines. Traditionally, students worked out of a textbook. We've all done this in our learning, either as teachers or as students, about, looking at the relationships between 2 lines. But using applications like GeoGebra, maybe Explain Everything or another screencasting tool, students could use the internet, search photos of different locations around the world, and then use these tools to see how the parallel and perpendicular lines are used in life. And suddenly maths comes to life. It's not just here's 2 lines, what's their relationship? You're actually using digital technology to get students problem-solving ideas that are happening in the real world from real photographs. They can then use formulas to investigate how these tools are used in architecture, and they can present their findings and share them to the class. So that's another way that technology is, taken, I guess, we're teaching a concept and completely modifying what we're doing to make it much more engaging and interactive. And a history lesson with Egypt is another example. So traditionally we watch videos, you read text and you talk about it. And if you're lucky to have been to Egypt, you can talk about the experiences. However, places like the British Museum, you can download 3D scanned versions of old relics. And you can, using a 3D printer, you could print out your own. So yes, it takes time, and yes, it can be costly. Printing it depends on the size of the artifact that you're printing, but you could actually get students holding it. They could experience it, and then they could use that as inspiration to design an artifact that could represent their life today. And what would they go about using and developing and designing? Alternatively, students could use or build video podcasts, create interviews, link to other resources, and take a real project-based learning approach to extend the activity outside of the boundaries of the unit or domain that's being taught. So you could even look at ways of modifying the task to include different domains and different areas. If you're doing maths, you could integrate the kitchen garden somehow into your maths. and use technology to take photos of, if you're doing the parallel lines or the perpendicular lines, take photos of vegetables that you're growing in the garden, or how the vegetables lay when they're dropped in a bowl or something. I'm not a maths teacher, but just some ideas about how you could meet cross-curricular domains and using technology to help you drive that redefinition. There are a variety of tools that you can help you in SMART, and one of them, from your point of view, if you wanted to create your own videos, you could use the video. Students can, teachers, if you have access to SMART Notebook, can use capture animations and lesson recorders to really create an in-depth exploration of what's been going on. And so use that as, I talked about a screen capture software before, you might be able to use SMART Notebook for that. But if you look at all the different elements of the Smart Learning Suite package, they can all be combined in a variety of different ways to create a huge amount of interactivity and huge amount of digital drive that makes you really think and really think about how you can redesign and redefine the learning that's going on in your lesson. Through game-based learning, manipulatives, all the different tools together can help you achieve that. And I've got 5 minutes left, so I just want, in the last 5 minutes before I hand back to Kendall, I just want to talk to you about where to now. Now, I've talked about what the SAMR model is. I've talked about the 4 stages and given you some ideas, and hopefully that's just planted the seed in those ideas planted the seed in your mind about what you could possibly do when you're teaching. But what I wanted to do now is give you some steps about where to now. What are you going to do? What can you do with this information, and what could you possibly do in your own classroom? Firstly, I think it's important, you need to think outside of the box, and everybody's box is different. What is the box is what you regularly do with your teaching or how you regularly use your technology. A lot of people may have a smart board, or they may have some sort of projection or screen at the front of the room that they only use as a glorified TV. The first step is, how can you substitute something and step outside of the box of what you do normally, and how can you use that technology to substitute something into your learning, augment it, modify it, or redefine it? How could you do something different that you're used to? So think outside of the box and think about what you could possibly do. The second thing is, I think it's important that we share. I saw a TED talk with, I think her name's Shonda Rhimes. She was the director of, and I think she wrote Grey's Anatomy, but she's an African-American woman who's a director and quite a famous director. And she did a TED talk, and she said this saying as part of her talk, you know, go fast, go alone, go far, go together. And I love that saying, because I think that if we share and pool our resources, we as collectively as teachers can take lessons that we've incorporated with SAMR, share them, and together we can all go a long way to creating a really engaging and interactive and inspirational learning environment for our students. So if you've done one of these lessons, or you do one of them in Smart Notebook or in Smart Learning Suite online, share it through Smart Exchange. Go to the Smart Exchange website, sign in, and then share your lesson with others. That way, and go and have a look at Smart Exchange as well to see if there's any lessons that you want to do, you might want to substitute, or you might want to augment, or so on. Have a look at Smart Exchange and see what other people have done already, and maybe that can give you a great tool to use in your class, or alternatively, a great starting point that you can download, use that tool, and then personalize it and modify it. So sharing is really important. I also think it's important that we help each other. Different people are at different stages of using technology in their professional practice, and it's very easy to feel, if you feel like that you're not overly skilled enough or you're strong in your use of technology or understanding of technology, it can very easily feel like, oh, I'm just going to shy away from it. I would give it a go, but I don't want to ask someone because it might make me look silly. What I want you to do is help each other. Realize that you can reach out to each other and other teachers in your school. You can reach out to me. I'm going to put my details up at the end, and you can ask me questions, and I'm here to help you, and we can work together to help all the students improve their learning outcomes and their engagement in classes. Because remember, a rising tide raises all boats, and that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we work together to rise the tide for our students. I put this in the wrong space. I realized that there's, so I'm just going to jump down. Oh, no, that was it. So we do have, I'll put up there, does anyone have any questions? I do have a couple of minutes, 1 minute left. If you do have any questions, I know there's only a couple of people left connected to my room, and I'm probably going to 3 people. If you've got a question and you want to add it up there, please feel free to do that, and I can answer that. But I think my biggest piece of advice that I can give to you is don't be afraid to try, and don't be afraid to fail. Now, don't think about failing as a word. Think about it as an acronym. First attempt in learning. You're learning too. So when you are looking at incorporating SAMR into your, when you're looking at getting SAMR into your teaching, you can, you're realizing you're learning too. So when you get up there, like I did with my lessons, if I'm doing something new, I have to tell the students that, guys, I'm doing this is new. It might work, it might not, but at the end, I'm going to ask you for feedback so you can tell me how it worked and how what I can do to improve it in the future. So if you think about it as failing as an acronym, your first attempt in learning, it gives you the motivation to move forward. So don't be afraid to fail and don't be afraid to try. It's really important. That's my biggest advice. Where can you get a copy of your presentation slides? Kendall will probably answer that, but if not, my next my next slide is going to have my my details, and I'll go to that now because I know Kendall's going to jump on in a minute and ask me to hand back over to her. But my details are there. Yes, I've given you my number, and yes, I have given you my email address. Don't hesitate to give me a call or shoot me an email to ask me about this. If you want a copy of my slides, I can contact me and I'll send you a PDF copy. They're there to be shared, or Kendall will share them. It depends. I don't want to step on anyone's toes here. But please, if you want someone to work with, you want some help, you want someone to go kite flying with, and what I mean by that is sharing ideas and to brainstorm, please reach out. I'm here to help you because I want to see all of us use the SAMR model and use technology in a way that creates a really positive and engaging learning experience for our students to help them improve their learning outcomes. Kendall, I'll hand back to you.
Great, thanks, Ben. I can take the controls back on my other screen here.
So thank you, everybody, and have a lovely evening.
Great, thank you, Ben. That was awesome. Lots of lesson ideas in that. So I actually think we had a few technical difficulties at the beginning of this webinar, so my introduction was cut off. So I know we had a few participants come in. So I think Sue Ellen and Kushma and Karen were here for were all in early, ready for my introduction, and it was missed. So everyone else came in after. So you're lucky, you're going to see it again. So I'll quickly recap it. So we had Ben Pisani, obviously you know what you registered for, was assessing the effectiveness of technology using the SMR model. And Ben, the presenter, is an education specialist for Pro AV, and he has extensive experience across the education sector, including an officer and learning designer at the Learning Network, Teaching and Learning Network, and also 15 years experience at a government secondary college, where he had multiple roles there, and was also a VCAA and a VCE and a VET performance exam assessor as an itinerant teacher in various government independent primary schools and secondary schools. So I know Ben did show that slide at the beginning as well, and that's where we started off. So that was the beginning of the webinar, and I'm sorry about that for those who were in early and missed it. I hope you all enjoyed the webinar. I'm going to do a quick recap now. So to get free resources, you can log into sorry, not a recap, I'm going to quickly close off now, quickly close off the webinar for everybody. So you can get free resources at SMEX on our Smart Exchange, which we also call SMEX, and that's at content.smarttech.com, and you can search for loads of ready-made lessons there, and you can search via grade and via subject. So we also have our Smart 360 virtual event platform up and running. So I'd encourage you to jump in if you haven't seen it yet. It's a great, rich experience. It tries to replicate the real event world as much as possible, and it does a very good job. So in there you've got, this is the lobby. This is a screenshot of the lobby that you can see. And then we've also got exhibit halls, research rooms, auditorium, and breakout tracks. Auditorium and the breakout tracks is where you'll find loads of professional development keynotes, as well as sessions from educators like yourselves from around the world. It is a global platform, and there is Australian, New Zealand content in there. Also in the exhibit hall, we do have our Smart Australia New Zealand booth, exactly like what you'd see in the real world at a real conference, at a physical conference like EduTech, for example. We have our virtual booth in there, which I do have a snapshot of. That is the at-home education games booth. And then here is our Australia New Zealand booth, so you can jump in there and say g'day to us. You've got the menu there at the bottom, so you can just click on those and they'll pop out with more information. And we've also got our webinar series in there, which you are attending right now. Okay, so, and this was also at the beginning, so glad I redo this at the end. So for your attendance certificate for this webinar, you can still gain that. You can log into training.smarttech.com and then you click on the certification, the blue certification box in the middle. You just click on learn more and it'll pop out to our webinar library. Just navigate to this library. It's laid out nice and user-friendly there, so you should be able to find it. So you, at the end of the webinar, we're recording, which is what's in the library. You just click on the Mark Complete button and that'll automatically generate you a certificate with your name on it. You just need to remember, to be logged into your training.smarttech.com account. So I normally have the recordings up with the certificate at the end and within a week. So for example, if you just make a habit of checking back every Wednesday before the next webinar to get your certificate for the week prior, that'll work out well. And we're already our second webinar in for the term. As usual, it's going nice and quickly. So next week we've got embedding social and emotional learning in active learning part 1. That will be Wednesday 24th of Feb. And then we actually have a part 2 for that webinar the following Wednesday, which will be March the 3rd. And then we've got on Wednesday, March 10th, we've got how to formatively assess your students. And then to finish it off, we're actually going to go through the Smart 360 platform extensively for you and show you best how to use it and show you some key pieces which we know will be very attractive, very informative, very relevant for our Australian New Zealand educators. So again, my name is Kendall Havenstein and I'm the Marketing and Operations Manager for Smart Australia New Zealand, and I'm always the co-host for these webinars. And I will be back next week with embedding social emotional learning in active learning part 1, to support that next week's presenter. So have a lovely afternoon and thank you everyone for joining. Thanks a lot. Bye.